Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we're traveling quietly into the past, to the candlelit halls of Tudor England. Our story is about King Henry VIII, not his battles or his queens, but the strange, excessive, and unsettling food that filled his table. This is a slow and gentle history, told without rush. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. So sit back, get comfortable, let your eyes grow heavy, and allow this story to fade softly into the background as you relax and drift toward sleep. We'll uncover the disgusting truth behind the royal feasts, exploring the mountains of meat and rivers of wine that defined his reign. Imagine the sights and sounds of a Tudor kitchen, a world away from our own. Let the story carry you away, back to a time of lavish excess and royal indulgence. Imagine this: dawn breaks over Hampton Court Palace. Inside, long wooden tables stretch across a vast hall, lit by the soft, flickering glow of hundreds of candles. Servants move like ghosts, their footsteps muffled, setting the stage for a display not of hunger, but of sheer, unadulterated power. For King Henry VIII, a meal was never just about survival. It was a performance. He ate to conquer, to dominate, to prove his might. In Tudor England, food was the ultimate status symbol. It was a language everyone understood. The more you could pile onto your plate, the more you could afford to waste, the more powerful you were. It wasn't about nourishment. It was about spectacle. And Henry, a man obsessed with his own image, wanted to be seen as more than just a king. He wanted to be a legend, a force of nature, larger than life itself. So, what did a feast for a king of this magnitude actually look like? Forget a simple roast chicken. We're talking about a culinary assault. The kitchens at Hampton Court were colossal, industrial-sized operations, staffed by over 200 people, all dedicated to feeding the king and his 1,000-strong court. Fires roared day and night in 6 giant fireplaces. Each year, they roasted over 1,000 oxen, 8,000 sheep, and thousands of deer. And that was just the red meat. The birds were even more extravagant. Swans, peacocks, herons, and egrets were often roasted and then redressed in their own feathers to look alive on the platter. These weren't just meals. They were elaborate works of art, designed to inspire awe and a little bit of fear. Think about it: a procession of servants carrying these majestic, refeathered birds into the great hall. It was pure theater. But the real showstopper was the sheer variety. A single course, and there were many could feature dozens of different dishes. You'd have everything from savory pies filled with songbirds to jellies molded into fantastic shapes and castles. And sugar, an incredibly expensive import, was used lavishly. It was sculpted into intricate sculptures called subtleties, depicting everything from mythological scenes to political allegories. Consuming these was like eating money. This extravagant consumption had a purpose beyond just showing off wealth. It was political strategy. By hosting these magnificent banquets, Henry could reward his allies and intimidate his rivals. An invitation to the king's table was a sign of favor. Being left out was a clear message. Foreign ambassadors would write home in disbelief, describing the mountains of food, cementing Henry's reputation across Europe as a monarch of immense power and resources. Henry's personal appetite was legendary. He was a big man, and he ate like one. Accounts describe him tearing into meat with his hands, tossing bones over his shoulder for the dogs that roamed the hall. This wasn't considered rude. It was seen as virile, masculine, and kingly. He wasn't just eating, he was embodying his kingdom's strength and prosperity. Every bite was a declaration of his absolute authority. His growing size, which we now see as unhealthy, was, in his time, a physical manifestation of his success and power. So, the next time you see a portrait of the formidable King Henry VIII, remember that his immense physical presence was carefully cultivated. It was built, meal by magnificent meal, not just to satisfy his hunger, but to feed his insatiable appetite for power. His banquets were a battlefield, and every dish was a victory. Ever wondered what a king eats for breakfast? Forget your avocado toast and morning coffee. Let's travel back 500 years to the court of King Henry VIII. This is what you'd find on his breakfast table. Imagine the scene: early morning, a grand hall, and a table groaning under the weight of food, even before the sun is fully up. But this isn't a feast for a special occasion. This is just Tuesday. For Henry, breakfast was a serious affair, a display of power and wealth from the moment he woke up. So, what's on the menu? First up, meat, lots of it. We're talking hefty meat pies, their crusts golden brown, steaming with rich fillings. Think venison, pork, or even swan, seasoned with expensive spices like pepper, cloves, and nutmeg. These weren't just for dinner. They were a breakfast staple for the king. Next to the pies, you'd find thick slices of manchat bread, the finest white bread available, made from meticulously sifted flour. But here's the kicker: it was often served as a sop, which means it was soaked in the greasy drippings from roasted meats. Forget butter. This was breakfast bread, fit for a tyrant, packed with calories and fat. And what did he drink? Water. Absolutely not. Water was often unclean and considered unfit for the nobility. Instead, the king's mug would be filled with ale or wine. Yes, alcohol for breakfast. A strong, nutrient-rich ale was the standard morning beverage for everyone, from the lowest servant to the king himself. It was safer than water and provided a significant source of calories to fuel the day. For Henry, it wasn't about getting drunk first thing in the morning. It was simply the normal, everyday drink. Alongside the meat and boozy bread, there might be a wedge of hard cheese or some preserved fish, but vegetables, fresh fruit, you'd be hard-pressed to find them. The Tudor diet, especially for the rich, was notoriously low on fresh produce. They believed vegetables were food for the poor and could even cause illness. So, Henry's plate was a carnivore's dream, a mountain of protein and fat. This breakfast wasn't just about satisfying hunger, it was a statement. Every single item on that table, from the white bread to the spiced meat to the ale, was a symbol of his status. Only the wealthiest could afford such a diet. The sheer quantity of food was a spectacle of abundance, meant to impress anyone who saw it. It projected an image of a king who was strong, powerful, and virile. Think about the calories. A modern person might eat around 2,000 calories a day. Historians estimate that Henry VIII, in his prime, could have consumed up to 5,000 calories daily. His breakfast alone would have been a massive caloric bomb, designed to sustain a man who spent his days hunting, jousting, and ruling a kingdom. This diet, however, would eventually take its toll. As he grew older and less active, this high-fat, high-protein, low-fiber diet contributed to his infamous health problems and enormous weight gain. So next time you're having your morning cereal, spare a thought for King Henry VIII and his breakfast of meat pies, greasy bread, and ale. It's a fascinating and slightly terrifying glimpse into the world of a Tudor monarch, where breakfast was less about health and more about power. What a way to start the day. Have you ever wondered why, for centuries, vegetables got such a bad rap? It seems crazy now, right? We're always told to eat our greens. But if we travel back in time, say, to the court of King Henry VIII, you'd find a completely different story. Picture the royal kitchen, a whirlwind of activity, chefs sweating over open fires. But look closer. Over in the corner, you'd see bowls of vibrant greens, fresh from the garden, completely ignored, pushed aside like unwanted guests at a feast. Why? Well, in Tudor England, vegetables were seen as food for the poor, the peasants who worked the land. The nobility, and especially the king, believed that to be powerful, you had to eat powerful food. And what was more powerful than a massive haunch of roasted meat? Greens, on the other hand, were viewed with suspicion. People genuinely thought that eating vegetables could make you sick, that they caused wind and all sorts of internal maladies. They believed greens made you weak, frail, and certainly not fit to rule a kingdom. A man of King Henry VIII's status and, let's be honest, his size was expected to consume enormous quantities of meat. It was a display of wealth, power, and masculinity. Feasts were theatrical performances of excess, with table after table groaning under the weight of roasted swans, peacocks, boars, and venison. Vegetables were barely a footnote, maybe a few root vegetables boiled into a pottage, but certainly not the star of the show. Henry himself proudly avoided vegetables. He was convinced they would diminish his famous strength and vigor. In his mind, true vitality came from devouring animals, not from nibbling on leaves like a rabbit. This attitude wasn't just a personal preference. It was deeply ingrained in the culture and medical beliefs of the time. The prevailing medical theory was based on the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Foods were classified by their properties, and vegetables were often considered cold and moist, which could upset the body's delicate humoral balance, leading to melancholy or sickness. So, a doctor at court would likely advise the king to stick to hot and dry foods, like roasted meats, to maintain his health and fiery temperament. It's a world away from our modern understanding of nutrition, where a salad is seen as the pinnacle of health. For Henry and his court, it was a plate piled high with meat that signified a long and powerful life. So, the next time you're pushing broccoli around your plate, just remember King Henry VIII. He would have probably thrown it at a court jester. It took centuries of scientific discovery and a complete shift in our understanding of the human body to elevate the humble vegetable from peasant food to a superfood. It's a fascinating look at how much our ideas about what's good for us can change. You know, when we think of a king's diet, we picture lavish feasts and extravagant spreads. But with King Henry VIII, lavish doesn't even begin to cover it. The man had an appetite that was, frankly, legendary and, not in a good way. His diet was less about nutrition and more about showcasing power and wealth. And the star of this show, meat. Imagine a dining table stretching as far as the eye can see, groaning under the weight of every kind of meat imaginable. We're talking beef, pork, venison, mutton, and veal, all served up daily. This wasn't just a simple roast, either. The royal kitchens were like a factory, churning out meat that was roasted on spits, baked into massive pies, and even boiled. They'd take a whole roasted peacock and redress it in its own feathers for presentation, or stuff a bird inside another bird, inside another bird, just because they could. The sheer quantity was staggering. It's said that the Tudor court consumed over 1,240,000 eggs per year, and a massive amount of red meat. Henry himself was reportedly eating around 13 main courses a day. 13. These meals weren't quick affairs. They were marathon events that could last for hours. Course after course would be brought out, a relentless parade of roasted beasts and savory pies. While the common folk might be lucky to eat meat once a week, Henry's table was a daily carnival of carnivory. It was a display of excess that truly defined his reign. This meat-heavy diet had some serious consequences. Though without much fiber from fruits and vegetables, Henry suffered from severe constipation. But the biggest problem was gout, a painful form of arthritis caused by high levels of uric acid in the blood, often linked to a diet rich in red meat and alcohol. His legs would swell up, causing him agonizing pain and making it nearly impossible to walk. Add to that a jousting injury that never properly healed, and you have a recipe for disaster. The once athletic, handsome king became increasingly immobile and obese, weighing nearly 400 pounds by the end of his life. So, while the image of Henry VIII, surrounded by a feast of roasted swans and mountains of venison, might seem grand, the reality was much grimmer. It was a diet that literally crippled a king, a disgusting truth hidden beneath the spectacle of royal indulgence. It's a powerful reminder that not even a king can outrun the consequences of his own appetite. Now, we know Henry loved his red meat. The man consumed tons of it, but his table wasn't just limited to beef, pork, and venison. To truly understand the Tudor court, you have to understand that dining was theater. It was about power, status, and showing off wealth in the most extravagant way possible. And nothing screamed, "I am the king," quite like serving up animals that most people would never even see, let alone eat. Let's start with the birds. When we think of poultry today, it's chicken, turkey, maybe a duck for a special occasion. For Henry, that was just the appetizer. The real showstoppers were birds of incredible beauty, creatures we now admire in parks and nature reserves. Imagine a grand feast at Hampton Court. The doors swing open, and servants march in, carrying enormous silver platters, and on these platters, roasted swan. Yes, swan. Those elegant, long-necked white birds were a delicacy reserved for the ultra-rich. They were a symbol of nobility. But preparing a swan wasn't just about roasting it. Often, after cooking, the swan would be redressed in its own feathers and skin to make it look lifelike on the platter. It was a macabre but impressive centerpiece, designed to make guests gasp. The meat itself was described as dark, dense, and quite tough, nothing like the tender poultry we're used to. It was all about the spectacle. And the spectacle didn't stop there. If swan wasn't shocking enough, how about peacock? Peacocks were the ultimate status symbol. These stunning birds, with their iridescent blue and green feathers, were painstakingly prepared. Much like the swan, a peacock would be roasted and then meticulously reassembled with its magnificent tail feathers fanned out as if it were still alive. Can you imagine seeing that presented at a dinner party? It was less about the food and more about the art and the audacity. Guests would marvel at the display before the carvers got to work. The taste, apparently, it was tough and stringy. One contemporary writer even called it food for angels, but meat for devils. It was all for show. The list of exotic birds goes on. The Tudor elite also dined on herons, egrets, and even seagulls. Think about that for a second. These are birds we associate with wetlands and the seaside, not the dinner plate. Herons, with their long, slender bodies, were considered a prize. The effort to hunt and prepare these birds made them all the more valuable at the royal table. But perhaps the most surprising dish from a modern perspective wasn't a bird at all. It came from the sea. We know they ate fish, but Henry's court also consumed marine mammals, specifically porpoise. That's right, a relative of the dolphin. In Tudor England, porpoises were classified as fish because they lived in the water, which conveniently meant they could be eaten on religious fasting days when red meat was forbidden. It was often called sea pork and was served roasted or in a thick, spiced porridge. The thought of eating a porpoise today is shocking, but for Henry's chefs, it was just another luxury ingredient to impress the court. Why did they eat these things? It boils down to two main reasons: status and availability. Many of these animals were protected by laws that made them exclusive to the nobility. If a swan was on your table, everyone knew you were someone important. It was the Tudor equivalent of owning a private jet. Secondly, their concept of what was edible was simply broader than ours. The world was their pantry, and if it moved, it was potentially dinner. This wasn't about nutrition or even flavor. It was a performance. Every meal was an opportunity for Henry to reinforce his power and magnificence. By serving these rare and beautiful creatures, he was sending a clear message to his court and to visiting ambassadors. I am the king. I can conquer nature itself and serve it to you on a platter. It was a world of excess, where the line between a pet and a main course was blurrier than we can possibly imagine. So the next time you see a beautiful swan gliding on a lake or a peacock showing off its feathers, take a moment to remember a time when they might have ended up as the centerpiece of a king's grotesque and gluttonous feast. It's a fascinating, if not disturbing, look into the mind of England's most infamous monarch. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to eat like a king? Well, for King Henry VIII, it meant a diet that was as extravagant as it was deadly. And at the heart of it all was one sweet, seductive ingredient: sugar. Today, we're diving deep into the sickeningly sweet world of Henry's obsession, a habit that literally rotted him from the inside out. Back in Tudor England, sugar wasn't something you just sprinkled on your cereal. It was an exotic, incredibly expensive luxury, a status symbol more valuable than many spices. It was the ultimate display of wealth and power. For Henry, a king who loved to flaunt his riches, sugar was more than just a treat. It was a statement. While the common folks sweetened their food with honey or fruit, Henry's tables were piled high with pure, refined sugar, molded into incredible sculptures and infused into almost every dish. Imagine a royal feast. The air is thick with the scent of roasted meats, but there's another aroma, a cloying sweetness that hangs over everything. Henry's chefs were masters of disguise, using sugar to create elaborate illusions. They would craft intricate sculptures called subtleties entirely out of sugar paste or marzipan. These weren't just simple desserts, they were works of art. You might see a sugar castle complete with tiny knights, a scene from a biblical story, or a mythical beast, all designed to dazzle the court and showcase the king's immense wealth. These sculptures were often the centerpiece of the banquet, paraded around the hall for everyone to admire before being broken apart and eaten. But the sugar wasn't just for show. it was in everything. The Tudor palate was very different from ours. They loved mixing sweet and savory flavors in a way we might find bizarre today. A huge joint of venison or a roasted peacock might be served with a thick, syrupy sauce made from wine, spices, and a shocking amount of sugar. Fish was often poached in sweetened, spiced wine. Even vegetables, which were already a rare sight on the royal menu, would be candied or glazed. It was a sensory overload, a constant bombardment of sweetness that permeated every single course of the meal. And then there were the desserts. Oh, the desserts were on another level entirely. Henry had a notoriously sweet tooth. His banquets would feature an endless parade of sweet pies, tarts filled with sweetened fruit, and rich custards so thick you could stand a spoon in them. One of his absolute favorites was a dessert called marchpane, which we know today as marzipan. It's a paste made from almonds and, you guessed it, a massive amount of sugar. It was molded, colored, and sculpted into all sorts of fantastic shapes. Jellies, often set in vibrant colors using expensive ingredients like saffron, were also incredibly popular, and again, loaded with sugar to help them set and taste delicious. They even had a special room dedicated to these sweet creations called the banqueting house. This wasn't the main dining hall. It was a separate, often smaller and more intimate building, sometimes on the roof of the palace or in the garden, where the king and his closest courtiers would retire after the main feast for the dessert course. Here, they would indulge in sweet wines and an array of sugary confections, away from the prying eyes of the larger court. It was a space dedicated purely to the indulgence of sweetness. So, what was all this sugar doing to the king? Well, nothing good. In the 16th century, the link between sugar and health problems was completely unknown. In fact, sugar was often considered a medicine. It was prescribed by physicians as a humoral balancer, believed to be good for digestion and overall health. They thought its warmth and dryness could counteract cold and moist ailments. How wrong they were. The most visible effect of Henry's sugar habit was on his teeth, or what was left of them. Descriptions from the time, including reports from foreign ambassadors, noted that the king's teeth were black and rotten. In an age without modern dentistry, tooth decay was agonizing and untreatable. The constant pain from abscesses and rotting teeth would have surely contributed to his infamous temper and irritability in his later years. He would have suffered from chronic toothaches, infections, and difficulty chewing. It's a grim image, a powerful king, adorned in jewels and fine silks, with a mouthful of blackened stumps. But the damage went far deeper than his smile. Modern historians and medical experts believe Henry's sugar-laden diet was a major contributor to a host of other health issues. This colossal intake of empty calories, combined with his increasingly sedentary lifestyle after a jousting accident in 1536, led to his dramatic weight gain. By the end of his life, he was morbidly obese, with a waist measurement of over 54 inches, and he had to be hoisted onto his horse. This extreme obesity brought with it a cascade of related problems. He likely developed type 2 diabetes. The evidence is compelling. His insatiable thirst, frequent urination, and the non-healing, foul-smelling ulcers on his legs are all classic symptoms. These leg ulcers, which plagued him for the last decade of his life, were excruciatingly painful and constantly weeping pus. The high blood sugar levels from undiagnosed diabetes would have severely impaired his body's ability to heal, turning minor injuries into chronic, infected wounds. Furthermore, this diet, rich in sugar and red meat, but severely lacking in fiber, fruits, and vegetables, would have caused severe constipation and other digestive ailments. It also likely led to high blood pressure and put an immense strain on his heart. When you piece it all together, the obesity, the diabetes, the leg ulcers, the dental decay, the gout, the potential heart disease, you get a picture of a man whose body was in a state of slow-motion collapse, all fueled by his love for the sweet poison that was sugar. It's a powerful irony. Sugar, the very substance that symbolized his wealth, power, and godlike status on earth, was the same substance that was slowly, painfully destroying his body, turning the magnificent monarch into a physically wretched and miserable man. It's a stark reminder that what we eat has profound consequences, a lesson Henry VIII learned the hard way. His story is a cautionary tale written in spoonfuls of sugar and paid for with a lifetime of pain. Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a king, to feast like royalty? Well, for King Henry VIII, it wasn't all glamorous banquets and exquisite delicacies. In fact, some of his daily habits were downright disgusting. And today, we're diving into one of the most shocking aspects of his life, his diet. This isn't just about what he ate, it's about what he drank, and the truth is pretty hard to swallow. Picture this. You wake up in a lavish royal bedchamber, the sun streaming through the windows of Hampton Court Palace. What's the first thing you reach for? A glass of water. Not if you're Henry VIII. In Tudor England, water was seen as a major health risk. It was often contaminated, drawn from polluted rivers like the Thames, and was blamed for spreading diseases like cholera and typhoid. People genuinely believed that drinking water was like playing Russian roulette with your health. So, what was the king's alternative? From the moment he woke up until he went to bed, Henry's drink of choice was ale. That's right, beer for breakfast. And we're not talking about some light, low-alcohol beverage. The Tudors drank a thick, nutritious ale, often called small beer, which was a staple of everyone's diet, from commoners to the king himself. It was seen as safer, cleaner, and more nourishing than water. Servants would be constantly pouring flagons of it for the king throughout the day. His day started with ale, his midday meals were washed down with ale, and his evenings were spent, you guessed it, drinking more ale. But it didn't stop there. When it came time for the main meals of the day, which for Henry were massive, multi-course affairs, the drinks got even stronger. Alongside the endless flow of ale, the table would be laden with pitchers of fine wine. Red wines, like claret from Gascony, were a particular favorite of the king. These wines weren't just for a special toast. They were consumed in vast quantities with every course of the meal. Imagine sitting down to a feast of roasted swan, peacock pie, and a whole boar's head, and pairing every single bite with a gulp of strong wine or beer. So, let's do the math. Historians estimate that King Henry VIII drank an astonishing amount of alcohol every single day. We're talking about roughly 10 pints of strong ale and several bottles of wine. That adds up to over a gallon of alcohol coursing through his veins daily. This colossal consumption wasn't just a matter of royal indulgence. It was part of the culture. A king's ability to provide and consume vast quantities of food and drink was a symbol of his power, wealth, and virility. The more you drank, the more of a man you were. Of course, this lifestyle had devastating consequences. While the ale provided some calories, the sheer volume of alcohol, combined with his gluttonous diet rich in red meat and sugar, took a severe toll on Henry's health. In his youth, he was an athletic and handsome prince, but by the end of his reign, he was morbidly obese, with a waistline measuring over 54 inches. He suffered from a host of ailments, including excruciatingly painful gout, leg ulcers that festered and smelled so bad that courtiers could barely stand to be near him, and likely type 2 diabetes. This constant state of inebriation also likely affected his temperament. Known for his fiery temper and impulsive decisions, it's not hard to imagine how consuming a gallon of alcohol a day would have fueled his paranoia and rage. Major state decisions, life and death orders, and political maneuvering were all potentially influenced by a mind clouded by constant drinking. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? The fate of a nation resting in the hands of a king who was never truly sober. So, the next time you pour yourself a simple glass of water, take a moment to appreciate it. For us, it's a basic necessity. For one of history's most famous kings, it was a danger to be avoided at all costs, leading him down a path of gluttony and ill health that would define the final, painful years of his reign. The story of Henry VIII's diet is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most luxurious lifestyle can be the most destructive. In the Tudor court, the motto was simple: more is more. Almost everything the king ate was fried. Meats, vegetables, even some breads, all took a deep dive into pools of sizzling grease. The air would have been thick with the heavy smell of cooking fat, a scent that for them meant wealth and abundance. They didn't just fry food, they drowned it. Once cooked, dishes were then smothered in butter. We're talking about ladles of melted butter poured over roasted birds, fish, and pies, until they swam in a golden, artery-clogging lake. This wasn't just about taste, it was a display of power. Fat was expensive, and using it in such massive quantities showed everyone just how rich and powerful the king was. There was no concept of a balanced diet, no talk of good fats versus bad fats, no counting calories, and certainly no concern for cholesterol. The royal physicians of the time believed that rich, heavy foods were necessary for a monarch, believing it fortified the body and the spirit. Vegetables were often viewed with suspicion, considered food for the poor and a source of bad humors. So, while we might picture elegant feasts, the reality was a relentless onslaught of calories. It was a diet of excess, built on a foundation of fat. Each meal was a spectacle of indulgence, a testament to a king whose appetite was as large as his kingdom. This extreme diet, of course, had severe consequences for Henry's health, contributing to his infamous obesity and numerous health problems later in life. It's a fascinating, if not horrifying, look at how the other half lived in. As a guest at one of Henry's feasts, you weren't just expected to enjoy the food. You were expected to eat until you were physically uncomfortable. The table would be groaning under the weight of countless dishes, from roasted swans and peacocks, still in their feathers, to mountains of meat pies, jellies, and custards. And the food just kept coming, course after course, wave after wave of culinary extravagance. To leave food untouched on your plate wasn't just impolite, it was seen as a grave insult to your host, the king himself. Henry VIII had a notoriously massive appetite, and he expected his court to keep pace. He would watch his guests with a hawk's eye, judging their loyalty by the enthusiasm with which they ate. A hearty appetite was a sign of a loyal subject, someone who appreciated the king's bounty and, by extension, his rule. A person picking at their food might be seen as disgruntled, unhappy, or even worse, disloyal. Imagine the pressure. You're sitting there, stomach full to bursting, and another platter of roasted boar's head is placed before you. The king is watching. What do you do? For the Tudor courtier, there was no choice. You had to pick up your knife, smile, and find room for more. It was a performance, a demonstration of allegiance, played out with a fork and a goblet. Refusing a dish could be interpreted as a rejection of the king's generosity, a dangerous move in such a volatile court. This culture of competitive eating was all part of the grand spectacle of Tudor power. The sheer quantity and variety of food on display was a statement of wealth and influence. The king could afford to feed his entire court into a stupor, a clear message to any foreign ambassadors or potential rivals. The banquets were a political tool, a way to showcase his magnificence and secure the loyalty of his followers. One painfully full stomach at a time. This forced feasting had serious health consequences. Gout, obesity, and digestive problems were rampant among the elite. The rich, ironically, suffered from diseases of overconsumption, while the poor often starved. The king himself, famous for his expanding waistline in his later years, was a prime example of this excess. His diet, heavy in meat and ale and lacking in vegetables, contributed to his numerous health issues, including painful leg ulcers and, very likely, type 2 diabetes. So, the next time you feel a bit full after a big meal, spare a thought for the courtiers of Henry VIII. Their banquets were less about fine dining and more about survival. It was a world where your appetite could be the difference between royal favor and a one-way trip to the Tower of London. The disgusting truth is, at King Henry's table, you ate what you were given. And you ate all of it, or you might not get the chance to eat again. In his younger days, Henry VIII wasn't the man you see in those famous late-life portraits. Far from it. He was a celebrated athlete, a true Renaissance man. Picture this: a tall, handsome king, skilled in jousting, a formidable opponent in wrestling, and a passionate tennis player. He was known for his love of hunting, often spending hours on horseback, chasing deer through the royal forests. His court was a hub of physical activity and sport, with the king himself leading the charge. He was the very picture of health and vitality, admired by his subjects and envied by his rivals. Contemporary accounts praise his powerful physique and boundless energy. This was a king who truly lived in his body, constantly pushing its limits. But then things started to change, and not for the better. The turning point was a severe jousting accident in 1536. He was unhorsed, and his armored horse fell on top of him, leaving him unconscious for 2 hours. This accident reopened and aggravated a previous leg injury, which would plague him for the rest of his life with chronic, painful ulcers. The once active king was now largely unable to participate in the sports he loved. Imagine the frustration of a man defined by his physical strength suddenly being confined by constant pain. Exercise, once a daily joy, became an agonizing chore, and eventually it vanished from his life almost entirely. So what happens when a top athlete with a massive appetite suddenly stops exercising? The answer lies on his dinner table. Henry's diet was already extravagant, fit for a king who believed his wealth and power should be displayed through lavish feasts. But without the physical activity to burn off the calories, his eating habits became his downfall. We're talking about a diet almost exclusively made up of meat. Roasted swans, peacocks, endless joints of venison, beef, and pork. It's estimated he was consuming around 5,000 calories a day, mostly from protein and fat. Vegetables and fruits were rare, often viewed as food for the poor. His drink of choice was strong ale and sweetened wine, adding hundreds, if not thousands, of empty calories to his daily intake. This combination of inactivity and extreme overeating had a catastrophic effect on his body. The pounds piled on relentlessly. His waistline expanded to a staggering 54 inches. He became so obese that he required mechanical contraptions, almost like early wheelchairs, just to be moved around his palaces. The once agile athlete could barely walk. This immense weight gain put incredible strain on his already injured leg, creating a vicious cycle of pain, immobility, and more weight gain. His health spiraled downwards. He suffered from a host of obesity-related ailments, gout, constipation, and very likely type 2 diabetes. The handsome, athletic prince had transformed into an immobile, ill-tempered monarch, a shadow of his former self. It's a tragic story, really. A powerful reminder that wealth and status are no defense against the consequences of an unhealthy lifestyle. From a celebrated athlete to a man trapped in his own body, Henry VIII's story is one of history's most dramatic and cautionary tales about health. So what do you think? Was it just the food, or was his jousting accident the real beginning of the end? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We often imagine a life of luxury, power, and endless feasts. But for King Henry VIII, that life of indulgence came at a horrifying price. Today, we read diving into the painful truth about his diet and how it led to a lifetime of agony. Forget the glorious portraits. We're uncovering the disgusting reality hidden beneath the royal robes. Henry VIII is famous for his enormous appetite. Historians estimate he consumed around 5,000 calories a day, which is more than double what an active man needs today. His diet was overwhelmingly rich in roast beef, venison, swan, peacock, you name it. He ate mountains of red meat every single day. Vegetables and fruits were scarce on the royal table, considered food for the poor. This meat-heavy, low-fiber diet, washed down with gallons of ale and wine, was a recipe for disaster. Imagine a table groaning under the weight of roasted meats, pies filled with savory fillings, and sweet puddings dripping with sugar. This was Henry's daily reality. But this extravagant consumption was slowly poisoning him from the inside. The human body is not designed to process such vast quantities of rich food, especially without the balancing effect of fresh produce. His digestive system would have been under immense strain, and his internal organs were working overtime just to keep up with the relentless onslaught of fat, protein, and alcohol. This diet led to a whole host of health problems, but one of the most debilitating was gout. Gout is a form of inflammatory arthritis, and it is excruciatingly painful. It happens when there's too much uric acid in the blood. This acid can form sharp, needle-like crystals in the joints, most commonly in the big toe, but it can affect any joint. Think of it like having tiny shards of glass grinding away inside your body every time you move. The primary cause of this high uric acid, a diet rich in red meat, organ meats, and alcohol, exactly what Henry was eating. In his younger years, Henry was an athletic and handsome figure. He loved jousting, hunting, and tennis. But as he aged, his lifestyle and a serious jousting accident in 1536 took their toll. The accident left him with a festering ulcer on his leg that never healed, making it difficult for him to exercise. His weight ballooned, and his once athletic frame became obese. This lack of mobility only made his gout worse. He was trapped in a vicious cycle. His diet caused pain. The pain prevented him from moving, and the lack of movement made his health deteriorate even further. Contemporary accounts describe the king's immense suffering. He would have sudden, severe attacks of pain, often in the middle of the night. His joints would become red, swollen, hot, and so tender that even the weight of a bedsheet was unbearable. Imagine a powerful king, a man who held the fate of a nation in his hands, being reduced to a screaming, helpless state by an invisible tormentor within his own body. His courtiers would have seen him wincing in pain, his face contorted in agony, as he tried to conduct the business of the state. The pain from gout was not just a temporary inconvenience. It became a constant feature of his life. Even between severe attacks, a low-level dull ache would have been his constant companion. This chronic pain would have undoubtedly affected his mood and his decision-making. Some historians speculate that his increasing irritability, paranoia, and tyrannical behavior in his later years were fueled by his relentless physical suffering. How could anyone rule effectively when they are in constant, agonizing pain? The king who famously broke with the Roman Catholic Church and executed 2 of his wives was also a man tormented by his own body. So, the next time you see a portrait of the formidable King Henry VIII, remember the hidden story. Behind the silks and jewels was a man whose gluttonous lifestyle led to a personal hell of chronic pain. It's a stark reminder that even a king cannot escape the consequences of his choices. The disgusting truth is that the very feasts that symbolized his power were also the source of his greatest weakness and suffering. If you think of King Henry VIII, you probably picture a huge, decadent feast. He's famous for his love of food, but what you might not know is that his diet literally rotted him from the inside out. Let us uncover the disgusting truth about what Henry VIII really ate and how it led to some truly gruesome health problems. In his younger days, Henry was the picture of health. He was athletic, handsome, and the envy of the English court. He jousted, he hunted, he danced. But as he got older, a serious jousting accident in 1536 changed everything. No longer able to exercise, his appetite remained as massive as ever. This is where things start to get really unhealthy. So, what was on the royal menu? Meat, meat, and more meat. We're talking about massive quantities of roasted beef, pork, venison, swan, and peacock. The royal kitchens would prepare up to 14 different meat dishes for a single meal. Vegetables, almost non-existent. They were considered food for the poor and lowly. Fruits were available, but often cooked into sugary pies and tarts. Bread was a staple, but it was the fine, white, refined kind, not the whole grains we know are good for us today. And to wash it all down, ale and wine, lots of it. It's estimated that Henry's court consumed about 600,000 gallons of ale a year. Henry himself would drink several pints of strong ale and sweetened red wine with every meal. This diet was incredibly rich in fat, sugar, and protein, but severely lacking in essential vitamins and fiber. This lifestyle had predictable and horrifying consequences. Henry's weight ballooned. Historians estimate he weighed nearly 400 pounds by the end of his life, with a 54-inch waist. He suffered from severe gout, a painful form of arthritis caused by high levels of uric acid, a direct result of his meat-heavy diet. He likely also had type 2 diabetes, though it wasn't understood at the time. But the most revolting result of his diet was his leg ulcers. Due to his immense weight and poor circulation, possibly complicated by diabetes, Henry developed chronic open sores on his legs. These ulcers were varicose ulcers that became infected, festered, and refused to heal. Imagine open wounds that constantly leaked pus and blood. The smell was said to be so overpowering that it could be detected from several rooms away. Royal physicians tried everything to treat them. They cauterized them with hot irons, applied poultices made of hunaswat, and lanced them to drain the fluid, but nothing worked. His diet, rich in inflammatory foods and lacking the nutrients needed for healing, like vitamin C, made recovery impossible. These painful, foul-smelling ulcers plagued him for the last decade of his life, leaving him in constant agony and contributing to his notoriously foul temper. So, the next time you see a portrait of the powerful King Henry VIII, remember the reality behind the royal robes. He was a man trapped in a body racked with pain, a walking testament to one of the unhealthiest diets in history. It's a grim reminder that not even a king can escape the consequences of what's on his plate. In his youth, Henry VIII was the total package. He was athletic, handsome, and the very picture of a Renaissance prince. He excelled at jousting, tennis, and hunting. But as he got older, a series of health problems began to plague him, and his once athletic physique gave way to morbid obesity. By his later years, he had a waist measurement of around 54 inches and needed help to even get around. This dramatic physical decline was accompanied by a host of rather unpleasant side effects. A major source of his health issues, and his notorious smell, stemmed from a jousting accident in 1536. The incident reopened a severe leg wound he had suffered years earlier. This time, however, it refused to heal properly. For the rest of his life, Henry was tormented by chronic, ulcerated sores on his legs. These weren't just painful, they constantly seeped pus and fluids. Doctors would try to treat them, sometimes even cauterizing them with hot irons, but nothing provided a permanent cure. The stench of infection from these open, festering wounds would have been overpowering, but the leg ulcers were just one part of the problem. Let's talk about his diet. Henry VIII was a voracious eater. His court consumed an astronomical amount of meatware, talking beef, pork, venison, swan, peacock, you name it. The royal kitchens roasted an estimated 1,200 birds a day. Vegetables and fiber, however, were considered food for the poor and were largely absent from the king's table. This incredibly protein-heavy, low-fiber diet would have led to some serious digestive issues. Think chronic constipation, bloating, and terrible gas. Combine that with the sugary wines and ales he drank in vast quantities, and you've got a recipe for a very unhappy gut and some truly foul odors. Then there was his dental hygiene, or rather, the lack of it. Sugar was a luxury for the rich, and Henry had a major sweet tooth. He loved marzipan and other sugary treats. With no modern dentistry, this led to rampant tooth decay, gum disease, and abscesses. The pain must have been excruciating, and the smell of rotting teeth and infected gums would have been a constant companion, tainting his breath every time he spoke. Courtiers would have had to be very careful to stand at a respectful and aromatic distance. Let's not forget the sweating. Tudor fashion was all about layers. Heavy velvets, thick furs, and elaborate silks were standard attire for a king, regardless of the season. Beneath these suffocating layers, the morbidly obese king would have been sweating profusely. This condition, known as hyperhidrosis, would have been made worse by his poor health and weight. The sweat would soak into the unwashed fabrics, creating a sour, stale body odor that clung to him like a second skin. Laundry wasn't a daily affair back then, so these clothes would have held on to that smell for a long time. So, picture this: the smell of infected leg sores, the stench of bad breath from decaying teeth, the internal odors of a failing digestive system, and the rank smell of stale sweat trapped in heavy, unwashed clothing. It's no wonder that a saying emerged among the courtiers of his later reign. You could smell the king from 3 rooms away. People would know he was approaching long before he came into view. It's a stark and rather disgusting contrast to the glamorous image we often have of royalty. The overpowering presence of King Henry VIII was not just a matter of his power and authority, but also, quite literally, his smell. The tables are groaning under the weight of roasted swans, peacocks, and entire boars, and at the head of the table sits King Henry VIII, a mountain of a man with an appetite to match. We all know the stories of his lavish feasts, but what if I told you the most dangerous thing on his plate wasn't the endless red meat, but something much sweeter? Most people think of sugar in the Tudor era as a rare luxury, but for a king it was anything but. Henry's court was swimming in it. Sugar wasn't just for dessert. It was a status symbol, sprinkled liberally on everything, including savory meat dishes. They even made elaborate sculptures out of it, called subtleties. Imagine a castle made of pure sugar, or a scene from a hunt, all edible. While it looked impressive, it meant Henry was consuming staggering amounts of sugar every single day. This wasn't just a sweet tooth, it was a monarch-sized addiction. But the king's love for sweet things had a truly ugly side effect. His legs were plagued by painful, weeping ulcers that refused to heal. Doctors of the time were baffled, trying everything from wrapping them in lead-soaked bandages to applying bizarre poultices. These open sores would have smelled awful and been a constant source of agony for the king. Modern doctors, looking back at his symptoms, see a clear pattern. These chronic leg ulcers are a classic and rather gruesome sign of a disease we know all too well today: type 2 diabetes. Think about it. A diet overloaded with sugar and red meat, combined with a lifestyle that became increasingly sedentary as his leg injuries worsened. It's the perfect storm for developing diabetes. His body was likely struggling to process all that glucose. But the physical decay was only half the story. The real horror was what this sugar bomb was doing to his mind. Have you ever felt hangry? That irritable, foggy-headed feeling you get when your blood sugar drops. Now, imagine that cranked up to a king's level. This is where the story takes a dark turn. Historians now believe Henry's legendary temper wasn't just a personality flaw. It may have been a direct result of his uncontrolled diabetes. Wild swings in blood sugar can wreak havoc on your mood. 1 minute you're fine, the next, a minor annoyance feels like a massive betrayal. We see this in Henry's later reign. His court became a place of fear. A wrong word or a small frustration could escalate into a terrifying outburst, with the king slamming his fists on the table, his face turning purple with rage. These weren't just temper tantrums. They were moments of pure, unpredictable fury. Consider the fate of his wives and courtiers. People who were once his favorites could find themselves on the executioner's block with shocking speed. While political reasons were always given, it's hard not to wonder how many of these fatal decisions were made in the grip of a blood sugar crash. A king whose body was at war with itself, whose mind was clouded by a chemical imbalance, making life or death decisions. It's a chilling thought. The sweet poison on his plate wasn't just destroying his body. It was turning a charismatic young monarch into the tyrant we remember today. So, the next time you hear about Henry VIII, don't just picture the gluttonous king at the feast. Picture the man in constant pain, his moods swinging violently, all fueled by his addiction to sugar. The disgusting truth isn't just about the rotting meat or unhygienic kitchens. It's about how the sweetest thing on the royal menu created one of history's most monstrous figures. We've talked about his feasts, his jousting accidents, and his many wives. That was Henry VIII's reality in his later years. The athletic prince who once charmed the courts of Europe was gone. In his place was a man of immense size, plagued by agonizing, weeping sores on his legs. These were likely varicose ulcers, incredibly painful and prone to infection. Every step would have been a trial, a searing reminder of his body's decay. This constant, unrelenting pain would have been maddening. Think about how a simple toothache can ruin your day and make you irritable. Now, multiply that by 1,000 and have it last for years. Medical experts believe this chronic pain likely led to severe mood swings, paranoia, and a dangerously short temper. He was no longer the composed ruler. He was a man lashing out, fueled by his own suffering. And let's not forget his diet. While the nobility feasted, Henry took it to an extreme. His menu was a relentless parade of red meat and rich, sugary foods, with almost no vegetables or fiber. Historians estimate he consumed around 5,000 calories a day, mostly from protein and fat. This diet would have been a disaster for his health. It likely contributed to obesity, gout, and possibly even type 2 diabetes, all of which would have worsened his physical agony and mental state. So, when we picture Henry in his council chamber, signing death warrants and making ruthless decisions, we need to add another layer to the image. This wasn't just a king wielding his power. This was a man in excruciating pain, his judgment clouded by illness. His leg sores would have throbbed, his joints would have ached with gout, and his mind, perhaps, was lost in a fog of anger and frustration. Consider the fall of his most trusted advisors, like Thomas Cromwell, or his increasingly brutal treatment of his wives, Catherine Howard and Anne of Cleves. Could his physical misery have made him more suspicious, more impatient, and far less merciful? It's entirely possible that his cruelest acts were committed not in a state of calm, calculated tyranny, but in moments of intense physical and emotional distress. His body was failing him, and in his rage, he made the whole kingdom feel his pain. This doesn't excuse his actions, of course. The executions, the political purges, and the personal betrayals are a brutal part of his legacy. But understanding the man behind the crown means understanding his suffering. The story of Henry VIII isn't just about power and politics. It's a tragic tale of how a body in revolt can lead a king and his nation down a very dark path. His pain became his policy, and England paid the price. We often picture Henry as this larger-than-life figure, a mountain of a man feasting endlessly. But have you ever thought about the people who made it all happen? His servants. These weren't just butlers and cooks. They were the architects of his decline, and their story is one of survival and fear. Imagine the kitchens at Hampton Court Palace. They were like a modern-day food factory, running 24/7, hundreds of staff, from the master cook down to the spit-turners, worked in a sweltering, chaotic environment. Their sole purpose, to satisfy the king's insatiable hunger. The royal court fed over 600 people twice a day, but the king's meals were a spectacle, all on their own. We're talking about massive quantities of meat, roasted swans, peacocks presented in their feathers, venison, boar, and a river of ale and wine to wash it all down. The pressure on the kitchen staff was immense. Every dish had to be perfect, prepared exactly to the king's liking. A mistake wasn't just embarrassing, it could be dangerous. In a court where the king's mood could mean the difference between favor and the chopping block, you did not want to be the one who overcooked the royal venison. The fear was real. Henry was known for his explosive temper, and displeasing him was a risk no one was willing to take. So they cooked. They cooked with precision, with skill, and with a silent prayer that their efforts would be well received. Now, let's move from the kitchen to the dining hall. Picture this, a long line of servants, each carrying a silver platter, laden with yet another course. They move with practiced grace, their faces impassive. These are the servers, the cupbearers, the carvers. Their job was to place the food before the king, to keep his goblet full, and to do so without ever drawing attention to themselves. They were practically invisible, human extensions of the royal will. But what were they thinking? As they laid down dish after dish, they saw firsthand the toll it was taking. They saw the king growing larger, his movements more labored. They saw the painful, ulcerated legs that made it difficult for him to even stand. They were witnesses to his physical decay, one platter of roasted meat at a time. Yet, what could they do? Who among them would dare to step forward and say, "Your Majesty, perhaps you've had enough"? It's a ridiculous thought. Suggesting the king should cut back would have been seen as an insult, a challenge to his power and virility. In Tudor England, a king's appetite was a symbol of his wealth, his strength, his very right to rule. To question his eating was to question the king himself. So they served. It wasn't about enabling a bad habit in the way we might think of it today. For them, it was about survival. Their livelihood, and possibly their lives, depended on giving the king exactly what he wanted. Every dish they placed before him was a step in his march toward an early death. But it was also another day of employment, another day of safety for themselves and their families. They weren't villains. They were ordinary people caught in an extraordinary and dangerous situation. They were cogs in a machine of royal indulgence, a machine that was slowly but surely grinding its master down. The story of Henry VIII's diet isn't just about one man's gluttony. It's a fascinating look into the power dynamics of the Tudor court, where fear was a daily currency and silence was the wisest counsel. The servants who fed the king were complicit in his self-destruction, but they had no other choice. They simply served, silently watching as their monarch ate his way into the history books. Well, for King Henry VIII, it was a one-way ticket to an early and frankly disgusting grave. Let's dive into the stomach-churning details of what this Tudor monarch was really eating. Picture this, the royal kitchens, a whirlwind of activity, preparing not one, not two, but multiple feasts every single day. We're talking about a staggering amount of food. Historians estimate Henry's court consumed over 1,000 sheep, hundreds of oxen, and thousands of deer every single year, and that's just the meat. The king himself was a voracious eater, a true glutton for punishment, as we'll soon see. His daily menu was a carnivore's dream, or maybe a nightmare. Breakfast wasn't cereal, it was slabs of roasted meat. Lunch, more meat, maybe a whole roasted peacock, its feathers put back on for a dazzling, if slightly morbid, display. And dinner, you guessed it, even more meat. We're talking venison, boar, swan, all washed down with gallons of ale and strong, sweet wine. His court would chow down on about 5,000 calories a day, a staggering amount even for an active person. Henry, in his later years, was anything but active. So what was missing from this royal spread? Anything green. Vegetables were considered food for the poor and were largely absent from the king's table. Fruits were rare, usually cooked into sugary pies and tarts. This lack of fresh produce meant Henry's diet was critically low in essential vitamins, especially vitamin C. And this is where things get really grim. In his younger days, Henry was an athlete. He loved jousting, tennis, and hunting. But a nasty jousting accident in 1536 changed everything. A lance pierced his thigh, creating a deep wound, an ulcer that would plague him for the rest of his life. And thanks to his terrible diet, this wound refused to heal. Without vitamin C, the body can't produce collagen effectively. Collagen is the glue that holds our bodies together. It's essential for skin repair and wound healing. Henry's body was literally unable to mend itself. His leg ulcer became a chronic, weeping sore that oozed foul-smelling pus. The stench was reportedly so bad that it could be smelled from rooms away. His attendants had to constantly change the dressings, a painful and gruesome task. As his mobility decreased, his weight ballooned. By the end of his life, he weighed nearly 400 pounds, with a waist measurement of over 50 inches. He had to be carried around in a chair by his servants. The once mighty king was now a prisoner in his own body, tormented by constant pain and infection. The leg ulcer was just the start. He likely suffered from a host of other health issues linked to his diet and obesity, including type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure. Even the best physicians in the kingdom were helpless. They tried everything from cauterization with hot irons to applying strange poultices, but nothing worked. The real culprit was on his dinner plate. His diet ensured that wounds would never heal and infections would never fade. Confined to his chair in a dimly lit room, the powerful monarch who had changed the course of English history was slowly and very unpleasantly rotting from the inside out. So, the next time you think about skipping your veggies, just remember King Henry VIII. His story is a powerful, if disgusting, reminder that you can have all the power and wealth in the world, but it means nothing without your health. In the quiet darkness of Whitehall Palace, a flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the tapestries. It was the 28th of January, 1547. In a grand, canopied bed, King Henry VIII, the once formidable monarch of England, lay dying. His reign, a tumultuous saga of power, passion, and religious upheaval, was drawing to its solemn close. At 55 years old, the king was a shadow of his former self. In his youth, he was the epitome of a Renaissance prince, handsome, athletic, and highly educated. He excelled at jousting, tennis, and archery. He was a composer, a scholar, and a charismatic leader who captivated his court and his people. Artists scrambled to capture his regal magnificence, painting a man who was the very image of vitality and power. His broad shoulders and strong legs were the envy of many, a symbol of the strength of the Tudor dynasty itself. But the Golden Prince had faded. Decades of lavish indulgence and a near-fatal jousting accident in 1536 had taken a brutal toll. The leg injury he sustained that day never truly healed. It became a weeping, ulcerated wound that plagued him with chronic pain for the rest of his life. The once sagile king became increasingly immobile. Unable to exercise, he found his only remaining comfort in food, and what a comfort it was. The royal kitchens were a whirlwind of activity, preparing gargantuan feasts day after day. Henry's diet was a testament to excess. He consumed vast quantities of red meat, venison, beef, and pork, often roasted on spits and heavily spiced. He devoured game birds like swans and peacocks, pies filled with rich meats, and custards thick with cream and sugar. He drank copious amounts of ale and sweetened wine with every meal. This diet, once a symbol of his wealth and status, slowly became his poison. As his mobility decreased, his weight ballooned. By the end of his life, it's estimated he weighed nearly 400 pounds. His waist measured over 50 inches, and he had to be moved around his palaces using mechanical contraptions. The magnificent suits of armor that once showcased his athletic build were replaced by ever larger, almost comical versions that could accommodate his massive girth. The constant pain from his leg, combined with his deteriorating health, transformed his personality. The once charming and jovial king became paranoid, irritable, and prone to violent outbursts of temper. His court, once a place of celebration, became a nest of fear and political intrigue. His body, overwhelmed by years of abuse, was riddled with ailments. He likely suffered from type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, and a host of other obesity-related conditions. The open sores on his legs were a constant source of infection and agony. On that cold January night, as his body finally succumbed, it was a quiet end for a man who had lived such a loud and dramatic life. The story of Henry VIII serves as a powerful reminder of how even the most powerful person can be brought down not by an enemy's sword, but by their own choices. His life, a spectacle of grandeur and tragedy, shows us how the pursuit of pleasure without restraint can ultimately lead to one's own destruction. The vibrant, powerful king had become a prisoner in his own decaying body, a lesson in excess that echoes through history. For King Henry VIII of England, that reality was a feast of epic and, frankly, disgusting proportions. Forget everything you think you know about royal dining. We about to dive deep into the stomach-churning details of what fueled one of history's most notorious monarchs. Let's set the scene. It's the 16th century. Henry VIII is on the throne, a larger-than-life figure in every sense of the word, and his appetite, it was legendary. We're not just talking about a big meal. We're talking about a daily consumption that would make a modern-day competitive eater blush. Historians estimate he was packing away around 5,000 calories a day. To put that in perspective, that's more than double the recommended intake for an active man today. And this wasn't just any food. It was a relentless parade of meat, meat and more meat. Imagine waking up to a breakfast of roasted meats. For lunch, a procession of dishes, swans, peacocks, presented with their feathers reattached, venison, boar, and endless varieties of fish on Fridays, and dinner. It was another gargantuan affair, often lasting for hours. Vegetables were scarce, seen as food for the poor. Instead, the royal table groaned under the weight of pies filled with live birds, jellies molded into elaborate castles, and mountains of roasted carcasses. The sheer volume is staggering. Records show the royal household consumed over 1,200 oxen, 8,000 sheep, and thousands of other animals in a single year. This wasn't just about hunger, it was about power. Each dish was a statement, a display of wealth and dominance. The more exotic and extravagant the food, the more powerful the king appeared. A grand banquet was political theater, designed to awe and intimidate foreign dignitaries and domestic rivals. But this theater of gluttony had a dark side. The Tudor court was a place of excess, where heavy drinking was the norm. Wine and ale flowed like water, often from elaborate fountains. This constant indulgence, this non-stop party, was a recipe for disaster. As Henry aged, his lifestyle caught up with him. A jousting accident in his 40s left him with a festering ulcer on his leg that never healed. It made exercise excruciating, but it didn't curb his appetite. He became increasingly immobile, a prisoner in his own colossal body. His waistline expanded to a staggering 54 inches. He had to be winched onto his horse and carried around his palaces in a chair. The once athletic prince, a man praised for his looks and sporting prowess, had transformed into a morbidly obese and bad-tempered tyrant. His health problems were a laundry list of ailments likely caused or worsened by his diet: gout, which caused agonizing pain in his joints, constipation, and very likely type 2 diabetes. Think about it. A diet almost entirely composed of red meat, sugar, and alcohol, with virtually no fiber. It's a medical nightmare. The constant pain from his leg, ulcer, and gout likely contributed to his infamous temper and paranoia in his later years. The man who broke from the Catholic Church and executed 2 of his own wives was also a man in constant, debilitating physical agony, fueled by his own excesses. As we look back at the empty banquet hall of history, the story of Henry's diet becomes more than just a list of disgusting meals. It's a powerful and timeless warning. It's a story about how unchecked power, in this case, the power to consume anything and everything, can lead to self-destruction. The very thing that symbolized his strength, his ravenous appetite for food, for power, for life, ultimately became his undoing. History often shows us that the greatest monsters are not slain by heroes on the battlefield, but are instead, slowly and inevitably, consumed by their own insatiable appetites. Thank you for watching. If you found this slice of history interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more.